went to school in Budapest, in Kassa, which is northeastern Hungary, today part of Czechoslovakia, in Nagyvárad, which is in eastern Hungary, in Transylvania, today part of Romania. Get my university education at the Technical University in Budapest on the source of the Danube River, and graduated in 1951. I started to work first in a photochemical factory 40 kilometers, that is about 25 miles north of Budapest, in Vác. After a year, they took me to a forced labor camp, and for a year I worked in a forced labor camp in various locations in rural Hungary.
What year was this?
This was 1952 and 1953. In 1953, about the time when Stalin died, a very high number of people were arrested and detained, perhaps because we were too happy and we were smiling a lot. I was arrested too. I spent a year and a month in various coal mines, one in Suhakalo, the other in Várpalota, where I learned the trade of coal mining, and as a chemical engineer I was in charge of the electrical and mechanical equipment of one of the coal mines for a brief period. Released in 1954, I worked for 2 years in the pharmaceutical industry. Today the factory is called Gedeon Richter Pharmaceutical Factory, one of the second largest pharmaceutical firm in Budapest. In 1956, I left the country together with about 250,000 of other Hungarians to the Austria first, and from Austria to the United States. I have been very well received here when I arrived, got several job offers with various companies. After visiting many of them, I accepted a job with Monsanto company, research and development laboratory in Dayton, Ohio. The work was very interesting, very nice. We lived for 2 years, a little more than 2 years in Dayton. I realized that it would be best for myself if I continue my studies. I was accepted to the Ipatiev Laboratory of Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and worked under Professor Herman Pines from 1959 till the end of 1961 to get my PhD in organic chemistry there. 1961 was a good year. I had an offer for chemistry graduates. I had about 10 offers in 10 different states of the United States. I visited about 6 of them and decided to work for Chevron Research Company in Richmond, California. At that time, Chevron Research Company was called California Research Company. I worked for Chevron for 24 years. 2.5 years ago, after Chevron acquired Gulf, I took early retirement, and so did about 20 or 25% or maybe 30% of my co-workers. I am an independent consultant ever since. My clients include JPL in Pasadena, SRI, Catalytica in the Bay Area, Catalyst Consultants near Philadelphia. My biggest client is Eni Ricerche in Milano, Italy, and the United Nations, and they send me periodically to Pune, India, to supervise a project on zeolite synthesis, characterization, and use. Now, I mentioned zeolites. During much of my time at Chevron Research, I have been working with zeolites, especially reactions in zeolites, shape-selective effects in zeolites, and I discovered the third type, the non-obvious type of shape selectivity, the so-called restricted transition state type selectivity. I have been also involved with aromatization, dehydrocyclization work, and also in dehydrocyclodimerization. My outside activities include mountain climbing, hiking, bicycling, swimming, windsurfing, photography, and some other outdoor sports.
What's your first memory of Hungary?
Oh, my first memory, I was a little boy. It goes back to my father and to my mother. We lived in a three-story building. Every afternoon I went out. I had to go out for walking for about an hour or two in a large garden. And there were some kids at my age. We were always playing around. There was a little dog called Hexie, who was a little fox terrier, and it was part of our play all the time. It wasn't our dog, it was one of the other people who lived in the area. We spent our summers always at Lake Balaton, always in the same place. And those were my best and happiest days all through my life when I could go to Lake Balaton. Every morning after breakfast we walked down to the lake, spent all day till lunchtime in the water, walked back to have lunch, after lunch back to the lake, and spent either sailing or swimming or just playing at the edge of the water as far as I can remember in the past.
Were you in Budapest during the Second World War?
During the Second World War I was in Budapest, sometimes but mostly in Kassa. That is, I mentioned I went to school there for 4 years. This is in northeastern Hungary. And for Hungary the Second World War started in Kassa because of that famous bombing, which is still not completely clear who did it. At that time the Prime Minister thought it was done by the Russians and promptly started proceedings to start the war with Russia. Newer evidence is not so clear. Some people claim it was the Germans, some others claim it was the Romanians.
And what do you recall during the Second World War?
Well, I recall that for many years, for us the Second World War was just news and newspapers and pictures, because Hungary was not involved. Even after we got involved with the war, it was an army, including my father, who were fighting in Russia. My father was lucky, he spent only less than a half year there. But later some reports came of losses and casualties. Still our life was in the backcountry not much affected until 1944 when the Germans invaded Hungary. Hungary wanted to get out of the war, and in March they first occupied the country, yet not completely involving in internal affairs. Complete occupation of the country came only in 1944 October, when all hell broke loose. It's interesting that the so-called Nazis, the Arrow-Cross people, the leadership was kept in prison until that day in a war where Hungary was nominally the allies of Germany. These people were released from the prison, and that wasn't very good. It was hard times. The Russians were there. Budapest was soon completely surrounded by the Russians. It was, I believe, the day of Christmas. And for about 2 months the siege went, destroying all the bridges and most of Buda and the last part of Pest in the process. At that time I was in the western part of the country, so I was not taking part in the siege, but I had seen our parents' home, or my grandparents' home was completely destroyed. For a while I lived at an uncle's house because there was a room which also didn't have a roof, also it still had 4 walls. It was tough when it was snowing or raining, but otherwise it was at least a habitable place. It had a ladder instead of staircase to go up to the second floor, because the staircase was bombed out, and it took about 3 or 4 years to rebuild that part.
What was it like after 45 to 50?
45 was, my recollection is that everything was in ruins. People were hoping that some better things would come out. There was a startup of a democratic Hungary. Very soon the democratic leaders were taken by the Russians to Russia, and in 48 the communists took over. Now, up until that point, things were really politically not as bad, but after 48 it was very bad. 45, 46 we didn't have much to eat. I think we also suffered the world's worst inflation. I believe we had to use 21 or 23 zeros after the 1 to express the last banknote which I have seen. Now, after 48, I was already at the university. Things started to become very bad. Arrests, deportations, disappearances were the order of the day. Collectivization of the private industry was completed within a very short time. The collectivization of the peasant farms followed, and generally speaking, the years of 1951-52 were about the worst. These were the last years of Stalin's life. We had our own private dictator, and decided that all people who could be considered capitalists should be deported from Budapest. Complete figures were not known, but estimates range to about 200,000 people who were taken to rural Hungary and used in farm work in place of the animals and machinery taken by the Russians during the war to increase the efficiency of the collectivized farms. There was not too much to eat. There was not too much to do. I, as I mentioned, spent some time of this period in a concentration camp and later in a prison. Many of my relatives have been deported into a small village where they were not allowed to leave the village perimeter for about 2 years. They had to work in the farms. Their homes were confiscated. They could carry only about 100 kilograms of goods for the head of the family and 50 kilograms for each member of the family. This included some furniture like beds and mattresses. After Stalin died, there was a short reign of terror, which was about the worst. That's when they put me into prison. But when Beria disappeared, the change was, and Imre Nagy became Prime Minister of Hungary, the change was quite significant. Many of us left the prison, including myself. I got amnesty. People were a little bit freer to talk, and there was also some improvement of the economic life. The rest is history and well known to everybody. Some attempts were made by the dictator to regain his power. He wasn't very successful. He was ousted by the Russians. The poets, the intellectuals, and eventually the workers and the students all found their voice, and they found that all they would like to do is to get rid of the communist system and the Russians. October the 23rd, in 56, the revolution erupted. We were initially winning. The Russians came in. Some of the troops sympathized with us, some of them did not. The Russians withdrew a few days later. There was a few days of complete freedom, and on November 4th, they asked for negotiations from the Minister of Defense, Paul Maléter. They arrested him early in the morning. They reoccupied the country with several thousands of tanks. There was widespread deportations, and the exodus of most of us refugees began at that time.
How far into it when you decided to leave?
I decided quite early. I saw that the Russian retributions could be quite severe, and I didn't want any change.
And you'd already gone through it once?
I already have been in prison once. I didn't want to go back second time, so we were some of the first ones.
And you were married at that time?
We were not married. We married a few weeks later in Akron, Ohio, after we arrived to the United States.
And what were you doing at Chevron when you started the work that led you to the third kind of shape selectivity?
Oh, we were going to find some test reactions which could determine the acid strength of zeolites. And I experimented with various models which have been in the literature, and I found none of them safe. And then I found that it's always a symmetrical one, which is the most abundant on the white core material, is missing on the somewhat smaller core, mordanite. And that more or less led to the realization that it has something to do with the shape and the size of the molecule. First I thought it is just ordinary shape selectivity, but to check it, I reacted the symmetrical alkyl benzenes, and I found to my astonishment that they can pass and isomerize just as well as any of the others. So it wasn't the size of the product, and we had to consider something completely different. And then when the idea that it may be the transition state which is involved here is responsible for the effects of the that are enclosed. Well, I was involved at first time when I went to Chevron. I had a very far-sighted supervisors, Gordon Langlois and Bob C. You may have known both of them. And on the very first day, we have discussed various type of possible projects I might get involved starting next day. And then Gordon asked me, well, do you have any idea of your own? So I said, I do. I would like to see whether we can make aromatics from propane and butane. And he thought for a moment. He found the idea somewhat curious, but he nevertheless considered that maybe this is a better thing to do than any of the other ones. And so I started out with dehydrocyclodimerization. At that time there were no zeolites, and we had to use a mixture of solid acids and a platinum component on a basic base, and the system was unfortunately alive only for a few minutes. After that it had to be regenerated. The economics was marginal, and after about 2 years we abandoned the project. It resulted in a few patents and publications and reviews, and of course the rest of it is well known. It was revived after ZSF5 appeared on the scene, and it did not need regeneration, and also gave a much higher conversion and aromatic selectivity. The process is now operational under the name of Ciclar by British Petroleum, because I understand now they're building a plant in Scotland, 500 barrels per day capacity or so. Other things I have done, I investigated cyclization of alkyl aromatics over platinum and other metal surfaces, more or less as an interest, and found that there are several types of cyclization mechanisms, some catalyzed by acids, some by platinum, some by both, and the products could be different if the length of the side chain on alkyl aromatics has 4 or 5 or 3 carbon atoms. Some, for example, acid catalyzed processes go only if there is one more carbon atom on the chain than the cycle requires. All through these years with my wife, we have been actively involved in first climbing the California mountains and later going to higher and higher mountains to South America, to Nepal. We climbed Kilimanjaro in Kenya in Africa, Popocatépetl, Iztaccíhuatl, Malinche in Mexico. We climbed in British Columbia. We plan to climb next week here in the Banff area, and going up to the north towards Jasper to do some hiking and climbing there.
This is the view of Calgary from the International Hotel 30th floor balcony. In the foreground you can see the Bow River. The airport is off in the distance. This is taken on the occasion of the 9th International Catalyst meeting that's being held in Calgary in late July 1988.